This is our Changing State Vote 2024. I'm Matthew Petty. The presidential election is just days away, and in a very contentious campaign, a lot of people are worried about election integrity. That includes fears of voter fraud, some of that stoked by misinformation, to concerns about outside interference in elections. Well, if you're worried about the election getting hacked, this may be reassuring. Jen Easterly, the nation's top cybersecurity official, says US election infrastructure has never been more secure. And here to talk about how local elections officers in Florida are working to make sure your vote is counted accurately is Wesley Wilcox. Wesley's the election supervisor for Marion County, and he's the chair of the Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or EISAC. Wesley, thank you so much for joining us. And for people who may have questions about the security of their ballot, what should they know about how it's counted and how you make sure that ballot is secure?
Very good. Thank you, Matthew. First off, let me clarify one thing. I'm a past chair of the EISAC.
Got it.
Each year we go through and there's a new chair, so I'm fortunate to be a past chair. But one of the things about the state of Florida, every ballot cast in the state of Florida is going to be on a piece of paper. So if the world had an electronic meltdown, we've still got the paper. And we've had paper ballots virtually almost 100% since 2002. There was a period in the early 2000s when we toyed with some other things, but we've got paper ballots. None of our systems are connected to the internet. You hear that often, and from me and my colleagues, that they're just not. People talk about some ancillary systems, voter registration, whatever, but the actual tabulation systems themselves are standalone. They're air-gapped between any outside interference. So our systems are the most secure that they've ever been. But just from a baseline perspective, the good thing about elections is they're conducted at the local level. And so say there was a coordinated effort from one organization or another, what might work well in Marion County, Florida, is not going to work well in Pinellas County or Hillsborough County, Florida, because they're totally different systems, And so by being diverse across our systems and is actually a strength to the system.
And you're talking about the physical ballot. I mean, that's a paper trail, right? And that's pretty important, as you say, if there were to be some kind of vast electronic meltdown. But even if there isn't, I mean, it's useful to have that sort of paper trail so you can kind of follow things back and say, these are the votes, these are the ballots, and here's how they were counted.
Right. And in every county in the state of Florida, since I believe it was 2008 when we started, we do an after the election audit where we literally, there's two versions of it now. You can do an electronic audit from a third party system, or you can do what we do here in Marion County, old school. And that's where you literally take the ballots from a particular contest, a particular precinct, and set them in front of humans and have them count that particular race, whether it be an amendment or judicial. We did judicial retention back here in November of 22. It was about 8,000 ballots in this one precinct. The answers were yes or no, and it took us about 4 hours to go through and count those 8,000 sheets of paper. So we do that after each and every election to confirm once again that our electronic systems are and produce the results that we as humans, if we were to have looked at them, would come to the same conclusions.
What are some of the potential cybersecurity threats then that you have to think about as an elections supervisor, and where would these threats be coming from?
Most vulnerable are any systems that set forward facing, that someone from the public can get to or have internet access and those type of things. Fortunate, I'll reiterate once again that the tabulation system does not have those vulnerabilities. It's not public facing, meaning it's not connected to the internet. No one can just log into it. To be able to log into that system, you have to physically be in that room where that tabulation system is housed. And so you've got physical security, like in my tabulation room, you've got to have a security clearance that gets you through our electronic doors to get in there. So it's not even open to all my full-time staff. So that's sitting out there. And the systems that are most vulnerable are websites, but websites are just reporting mechanism. It's kind of like if I were to post the results on a digital billboard I had out in front of my office. If somebody drove their car into that digital billboard and it no longer worked, still didn't affect the results. The results are what they are. It's just somebody that can't drive by and see them. Mm-hmm. And so our websites are those are the areas that are vulnerable because they are forward facing.
Yeah. Now, in 2016, Russian hackers were able to get into the systems of 2 county election systems in Florida. Was that a watershed moment for election supervisors in the state, and what changed since then?
It was. I will tell you, I've not been privy to any of the information out of that. Other than anecdotally, just because it's still, classified, I guess. But it was, really prior to 2016, cybersecurity was a concern, but it did not rise to the level that it needed to. And so after that moment, not only the entire state of Florida, but now it spread across the U.S. and that cybersecurity went from a somewhat of an afterthought to where it's now at a forethought. If I'd have mentioned the word phishing or any of that back in 2016 to the majority of my colleagues, they had talked about, well, you want to go out in the Gulf and snapper season, and but now everybody, that's just general terminology. It's commonplace. And so we have raised our level of cybersecurity awareness, education. We've put systems into place for endpoint detection and remediation and reporting, all of those type of items that really were not a thought 8 years ago. Mm-hmm. And, it's a sign of the times.
There was a data breach last year in Hillsborough County that revealed personal information, including social security numbers and driver's license numbers of some 58,000 voters. I mean, does that tell you there are still some vulnerabilities in election systems, and despite those efforts to kind of shore up security?
Oh, yeah. We're in a race that, and I've heard this said hundreds of times, we're in a race with no endpoint. Every time we build something to more secure whatever that treasure is, somebody builds a better way to break in. And so what we do today may be sufficient for today, but it won't be sufficient for tomorrow. And so there are always going to be us upping the game, because the other side is upping the game at all times. And so we've got to continue to expand. We've got to continue to educate. We've got to continue to look for these ways. The people are going to think of new ways to do stuff. That's unfortunately American ingenuity, and sometimes it works against us. And so we're always having to look at those things, always having to evaluate our systems for whatever the latest, greatest bad thing is.
Is it just a question of money, like in terms of the resources you need to put in place, and like what is the price tag on staying ahead of the curve when it comes to making sure your systems are as safe as they can be?
It's fiscally steep. Cybersecurity is not cheap. If you're in the market for personnel that have cybersecurity expertise, those folks are highly trained, and it comes at a big cost. And the challenge that you face is There's 67 counties here in the state of Florida, and we've got 20 that are basically deemed economically disadvantaged. And how can you hire someone that has that type of expertise, that commands a six-figure salary to go work in a small jurisdiction like that? So we've got to figure out, and we're doing it, I think, figure out ways that we can leverage that expertise and share it amongst the entire community. There are counties in the state that have the means to hire someone like that and have full-time those type of employees, but the majority do not. And so we're having to leverage that expertise and that knowledge to raise us all.
When you think about cybersecurity threats, just kind of in the general sense, I mean, they are constantly evolving, right? And you see reports of ransomware attacks against businesses, schools, hospitals. When you read those headlines, does that kind of send a bit of a chill down your spine, thinking, could this be me next? Could this be my office next?
Every day, anytime you read one of those, you think, oh my gosh, who's next? Because no one is immune to this. You could be next, and just because you've got everything in place, you go back and you read all the statistics out of how the majority of these occur. It's from internal, somebody clicked on a link. We do, continued phishing education, all of those things, social engineering and those type of things. But somebody, breaks it down. Mm-hmm. And, we see those. And so it's a constant battle every single day. Hackers or whatever it is, they know that this is my busy time, that everybody in here is working 10, 12-hour days, and so that may be a good time. You hear the ones about identity theft with tax stuff, and when do they hit? Around April 15th. The shopping stuff, when does that hit? Around Black Friday. All of those, the people that are targeting this stuff know when the busy times are and when somebody may be at their most vulnerable. Mm-hmm. But we recognize that somewhat, and therefore we're upping our vigilance, during these times, constantly reminding our internal controls that, hey, be on the lookout, know what you're doing, know that you're expecting something, and those type of things. So we're working it, but you're always vulnerable.
And it sounds from what you're saying, and I guess this makes sense when you think about it, right, that no matter how good your infrastructure is, no matter how many resources you've put into the kind of digital safeguards, it's the human element that is a bit unpredictable, and there's where your vulnerabilities can come in.
Well, that and, my customers, which are voters, not all of them are the most technically savvy, and therefore, they do things that if I were in a normal environment sometimes would be just basically blocked at a firewall. But you've got to give those that have that less technical savvy a way to still communicate with us electronically. So it's a fine dance between, what comes in and what goes out.
As you pointed out earlier, Wesley, you're no longer the chair of the Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center. I just wanted to note, though, that center brands itself as a trusted cybersecurity partner for elections officers and associates. What's your elevator pitch for what that center does?
What our goal, since elections were deemed critical infrastructure, is bringing that infrastructure up to a minimal level, and we want to continue to raise the standards. I was there I was an original board member back several years ago, and the things that we're faced with is, I do believe Florida is one of the leading states as it relates to cybersecurity infrastructure. But there are a lot of states that their cyber infrastructure as it relates to elections is one computer sitting in City Hall that they turn on once every 4 years or 2 years or whatever it may be. So we've got to pull in all of those other jurisdictions and raise them up. And we're charged with education of our members and finding solutions specifically for those that are economically disadvantaged, just because in rural Georgia or Alabama or Wyoming, where they may not have critical infrastructure cybersecurity personnel, getting them the tools needed to not only evaluate where you are, and you got to honestly evaluate, but give them something to be able to start to shore up their offices. Because elections, we've seen, you mentioned 2016 earlier, and you mentioned two jurisdictions that were possibly hacked by an outside agency. Mm-hmm. Well, that was 8 years ago. The other 65 of us that did not suffer those type of breaches, we still get the association with that.
Sure.
So elections being hacked in Wyoming, even though I'm sitting in here in Florida, I'm still going to be associated with that because, well, if they could do it in Wyoming, why couldn't they do it in Florida? Type stuff. Mm-hmm. And so it's in our best interest from a profession to raise everybody across the U.S. And that's part of the charge of the ISAC, is to get that message out, get our members in, start educating those, and raise them up. I think we did a lot we've been an agency for 7 years, something about like that. Those partners that have been around for 25, 30, or 40 years have told us that from zero to where we are now, we got there faster than basically anybody else has ever done in their past. And mm-hmm. so I think we'll make those same great steps over the next 5 to 10 years.
I wanted to ask too about physical security for elections officers and staff, because as you point out, this is your busy season. This is when all the attention is on those elections workers and the officers. How big a deal is that physical security in 2024?
I could not differentiate its level of importance to me with cybersecurity, and that it's unfortunately top of mind. You go back just 8 years ago and times have changed. There's a lot of offices now have bulletproof glass. You can't physically, get in touch with anybody that works in the offices anymore. Voting sites, early voting sites, the security that we have at them, it's prohibited to have a security guard of that nature inside of one of those for some good reasons that historically, so it is a challenge. But I know we've worked well with our law enforcement partners across the state to be on the ready, know where our polling places are, know where our early voting sites are, be able to respond to any incident, quickly. A lot of times, our response is almost, if we can get there, it's almost a de-escalation type stuff. If we can get there in the front side before everybody really gets heated about everything, a lot of times we can diffuse it and head off any event that may have popped up if we let it go.
Wesley, this is a very closely watched election, and there's a lot of kind of election stress, I think, from folks, whether they're voters, election staff, elected officials, people running candidates. How are you feeling about this election?
Actually, I'm feeling okay. People are voting. Had a decent vote by mail return. Not great, but decent. Early voting seems to be extremely popular here in the county. And different jurisdictions are going to have different methods that are their most popular. But all in all, I'm thinking a lot of things that we put in place over the last, several years are going to position Florida well to, be done on election night. Let me clarify one thing. There is no jurisdiction in the entire country that finishes and they're 100% done election night, period. No one, nowhere. Florida, our first set of unofficial results, we do not report until after 5 o'clock on Thursday. So don't get the wrong idea that, Tuesday night, that's it.
Yeah.
Tuesday night, everything you see is just preliminary.
Right.
Our first unofficial report is not filed until after 5 o'clock on Thursday, almost 48 hours after polls close.
And that's a good reminder for people who are closely watching this election saying, why don't I know the results already? Well, Wesley Wilcox, Election Supervisor for Marion County, thank you so much for your insights. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me today, Matthew.
And you can find more insights into the election on Our Changing State Vote 2024, wherever you get your podcast, and watch on YouTube. I'm Matthew Petty. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Our Changing State is a production of WUSF. Our executive producer is Grayson Doctor. Scott Wachtler produces the podcast. Videos by Warren Buckholtz and Chandler Bolcom, who also does our graphics. Engineering support from Blake Bass. Jackson Harp composed our theme music. I'm Matthew Petty. Thanks for listening.